Greetings, it is I, Countess Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my discussion on the clans and bloodlines of Vampire the Masquerade in the world of darkness. Today we're continuing with yet another independent clan, the Ravnos. Now the Ravnos are masters of animalism, fortitude, and chemistry. They're known as tricksters and deceivers, masters of deception and theft, who were truly not really understood until the final nights, until these modern times. That the Western Ravnos, that everybody knows really, those tricksters, are heretical branch of the true clan in the East, in India. They saw themselves as avengers, replacing the fallen Kuei-jin in the scheme of the natural order of the universe. All this, though, became irrelevant when Zapathasura, their progenitor, arose from Topor in basically the late 90s, and so destroyed and basically crushed the clan into what it sort of exists today. Very little of what's left of them. Now the Ravnos, their weakness is that they have some sort of vice. Now granted, this isn't always a criminal vice, it just mostly is a criminal vice. In the more modern take on this, there is some other opportunities for this, but if we're looking traditionally, it's traditionally criminal vices that when they have the opportunity to commit to this vice, whatever it should be, they must make a self-control check or they have to do it. Now when we look back on their history, from the vampire side, it tells stories of basically this thief that once embraced was supposed to effectively spy on the third generations, but helped lead to the downfall of the second generation. Again, we're not sure if this thief was second or third generation themselves. The Ravnos side tell a different story entirely. They tell the story of these fall of angelic beings, which are assumed to have been the Kuei-jin, when they became blood-sucking monsters. And that one that had basically suffered and died from these creatures was risen and given life again, basically becoming the progenitor of the clan, and then was made into a position to go against and battle against these fallen beings, embracing 5 childe, and these 5 led to the modern bloodlines of Ravnos. During the prehistory within India, where this was supposed to be taking place, those 5 were eventually said to have got tired of this conflict and basically leave it, to abandon their sire to the battlefield. And their sire eventually would then go into Topor. The majority of these elders headed west. Chandraputra stayed within India and formed the eastern version of the clan within there, restructuring it based upon much of these ancient Indian civilization, leading to its basically mimicking of caste systems. Now, these Indian Ravnos did face 2 invasions during these ancient times. One, they faced the invasions of Western vampires along with Alexander the Great when he headed east and hit India. And the other was from the Kuei-jin in China going after them also. Here's where we see the divergence between Western and Eastern Ravnos begin. The Western ones began to follow the path of paradox, which began to be corrupted, while the Easterns divided into castes, as they were like the Assamites, as they were the only one within the Indian subcontinent. Now, Ravnos society during the Dark Ages was influenced by 2 things. First off, in Western Ravnos, the continued degradation of the path of paradox and changing it from what it originally was. And the second thing was the influx of Eastern Ravnos along with the Roma. So the path of paradox began to continue to evolve, or basically devolve, into what it would be known for today. More of a path of that would be thieves and degenerates. And that is why some of the reputation of the Western Ravnos basically is of this low class, that they're seen as having this terrible low reputation because of this degradation of the path which they were following. On the other hand, we did see Eastern Ravnos begin to basically head west. They followed the Roma. The Roma are effectively the caste version of Ravnos. They see themselves as superior. But we saw that some of the Eastern Ravnos followed them and basically began to have this influence on the Western too. That the predominance of the clan was truly the Eastern and the powerhouse behind it. It was during the Victorian age that the Camarilla learned of the Eastern Ravnos and learned that that was truly the power source of the clan, controlling an entire subcontinent. This didn't change the way they were treating the Western Ravnos. The Western Ravnos still looked at the rules and the way of doing things within the Victorian society as something to rebel and fight against and try to basically defeat. And they oftentimes did this through tricking both kindred and mortals alike. When we move into the modern night, there is very important information. We basically focus around the Week of Nightmares. But we have to set up what happened with the Week of Nightmares. In the 1990s, the Cold War between the Eastern Ravnos, and the Kuei-jin heated up. The Eastern Ravnos, they decided to take some tactics made by the Sabbat and mass embraced a number of basically soldiers, foot soldiers they could send in wave after wave against the Kuei-jin. This actually had an interesting result. The deaths of these many kindred basically had an echo throughout the bloodline and began waking up their elders, their Methuselahs, and eventually led into 1999, where their progenitor himself awoke from torpor. The progenitor turned against his clanmates, and then just began to destroy and attack everything. There seemed to be no reason or no purpose to what he was doing. There was no real motivation for his attacks. It took the combined efforts of 3 Kuei-jin Buddhivistas, a number of Garu tribes, a number of undetermined mortals, and a small army of technomancers in order to finally stop this progenitor. And even so, their combined efforts just barely stopped the antediluvian. Barely killed him. In his death throes, he unleashed a powerful curse on his bloodline. The Ravnos became mad with cannibalistic fury. They turned on each other. To the outside, this week was interesting. All of a sudden, the Ravnos gained incredible powers of chemistry, became nearly ridiculous levels of power within their one discipline, their clan discipline. And then they turned on each other cannibalistically, killing many of each other. The result is only about 100 Ravnos exist worldwide. That is what's left of the clan. And only one elder survived. Dirge Lin is the only Ravnos of significant generation to survive all this. The only one. So the majority of Ravnos is gone as a result of this. The remaining Indian Ravnos have now sought shelter with those other kindred that exist within India, basically hiding from the Kuei-jin, because there aren't many of them left to actually fight anymore. Now, when we talk about organization, we do have to look separately to Eastern and Western. Western Ravnos are kind of individualistic. They don't have an actual organization. Didn't really have. They find themselves that they do have a respect for their clan, for their family, and have worked together with them. But generally speaking, they look to themselves more than anything. On the Eastern side, we had the different castes, basically divisions. First off was the Brahmin, or the priests, who replaced fortitude with auspex. They're actually considered a bloodline when it comes to the Western version of the vampires, so I will talk about them more. The Kshatriya were the military leaders of the Ravnos, forming that group of them. The Vyastriya were basically in charge of maintaining the Masquerade, or their version of it, within India, and also taking care of any sort of mortal affairs like things like money and stuff like that. And the Chandras were basically their version of Kadif, or within the Ravnos society here. Now these were the Jati, they were called. They're based upon the Jati of Hindu society. Post the Week of Nightmares, they don't really have an organization anymore. There's so few of them that any of these organizations have effectively broken down. Now, they do have a number of bloodlines, a number of Jati. I'll talk about the major ones and then go over a bunch of the minor ones that have existed now. The Jati themselves are effectively tradition changes that can lead to basically alternate bloodlines within them, but it's because the nature of it, this basically breaking the caste, that we see these variants. The Bayat Marjim are basically the Arabian versions of Ravnos, the Arabian ones, which were as well liked and are seen as deceivers, as pretty much any kind of group. They're seen through this eyes of the deceiver. It's in fact what their title actually means, deceivers. So they do have this air of the Western Ravnos to them. There were in fact 3 Baji that were here. I will talk about these Baji separately, but they were the Alexandria, Basharite, and the Roma. The Roma, of course, were the only one of them that was seen in the most negative life. The other 2 managed to get along in these areas. The Puraja are the remaining caste within the Ravnos. They're the priests. They're what survives post the Week of Nightmares, using animalism, auspex, and chemistry. They're seers and lore keepers within the clan itself. Now let's talk about the Ravnos antitribu. Now the Ravnos antitribu are probably the least antitribu of any of them, like the least anti-tribu. That's an interesting way of saying it. They still love trickery and deceit. They love to wander. But the fact is, many of them find the codes and the orders within the Sabbat difficult to follow. That is why those that believe that in joining with them form powerful blood oaths and rituals in order to effectively bind themselves not only to the Sabbat, but to the other anti-tribu of Ravnos. Basically, they come up with these promises to those of Ravnos within the Sabbat that they don't want to betray them in particular. It's that they keep each other in check in a way, rather than the fact that they just have this loyalty, because they have that trickery and deceit deep within them that they love to do still. It makes them a little less trustworthy within the Sabbat, and that is why these rituals, these oaths, are made. Effectively, final death should be the only thing which breaks these oaths that they're taking, that some of them do take when they join the Sabbat. Now, the advantage that they had by being anti-tribu is that they are the group of Ravnos that has survived the most into the final nights, into the modern days, because they were with other clanmates, other clan members. They weren't just with Ravnos when they were out there. So when things went awry, when they changed and went all cannibalistic, many of them were being held in check by the other Sabbat vampires that were around them, basically being held back. So many more of them survived than any other group of Ravnos. They suffered the least. Let's talk about the other minor Jedi. The Alexandrites were effectively the Jedi that lived within Egypt. They were masters of formal Canaanite etiquette. The Basharites combined some Christian doctrines with the path of paradox to create their own sort of hierarchical tenets that they followed. Many of them became the anti-tribu within the Sabbat. The Kaladeresh were a group that actually found safety within the Middle Kingdom, within China, and have managed to avoid war with the Kuei-jin. The Fatimites were descended from the Methuselah Fatimite, and were seen as the sort of couriers within the Ravnos society. The Roma were basically stereotypical gypsies, and were the greatest branch of all of Ravnos, up until the Week of Nightmares. They were your stereotypical gypsy Ravnos. Because of their proximity to each other, this family unit that they had with each other, similar to what gypsies did, they suffered the most, and they are nearly extinct. So while they were once the greatest, they are now perhaps one of the weakest of the remaining Ravnos bloodlines. The Sybarites were a group of Ravnos descended from Rome. They are the ones that were the originators of the corruption of the path of paradox, and it was their excesses that has led to many of the criminal regard of the clan. Basically, they were the ones that came up with the idea that they were criminals in other kindred's minds. The Yoyargi were a splinter of the Sybarites who followed a now forgotten path of a variation on the path of paradox that's long since gone. Now, Western Ravnos is always been dominated by this clan idealism of family, similar to the Roma, which they are historically connected with. So they have this clan solidarity with each other. The most common manifestation of this entire setup is something called the treatment. Basically, if the Ravnos seems slighted, they will work together to get a group vengeance against that which has slighted the Ravnos. So that is what the treatment is, which they will manifest in interesting ways, but effectively it is using trickery and deception to get revenge on someone to basically drive them into a little bit of insanity. Now, the Ravnos have always been dominated by this religious role. Now, the differences in the religious role did separate between the eastern and western branches of Ravnos, though during those late 90s, before the Week of Nightmares, the eastern elders were trying to basically re-educate their western bloodline through violence, through the use of knives. And they were doing a successful job of basically re-educating them at the time, turning the clan back to the straight and narrow. Now in India, as I said, Ravnos dominated the continent. They were the clan that had the largest control of a single continental area, the largest single concentration of a clan in a single country. They actually paralleled the Assamites greatly. They had a caste system that, from the outside, people didn't recognize. And they had strict military hierarchy for the way they did things. So both of them had very interesting parallels, even though they did exist within different territories. Embraces for them varied between Eastern and Western. Western would embrace usually from the gypsy population. Now, this doesn't say that there wasn't exceptions. The antitribu would embrace much differently than their normal version of the clan Ravnos. In the Eastern side, they would embrace choosing those that they felt would be putting them in the next level of Savadharma, basically seeing that embrace as an evolution of this within the philosophy of the culture there. They also saw that their jati in life was their jati in death, so the caste system that they had in life reflected death too. Now, for their clan weakness, they originally were all criminals, having that one thing that they would obsess over. The 20th anniversary of Vampire has actually changed this a little bit and made it a little less damning. They made it that they have generally a compulsion, which could be a beneficial compulsion, something that seems nice in a way, or a deviant one, depending on how you wanted to build your character. Of course, now most Ravnos would aim for the deviant one. It fits within the idealism of the clan. But it gives an opportunity that there could be a small variant within them, that it is an obsession, not a criminal one necessarily, that the Ravnos are suffering from. The Ravnos have had many changes over the years. Of course, when we first had them in first edition, they had a completely different weakness. They've effectively gone from all editions, from Gypsy to India as the source of them. Second editions where they brought in this connection to gypsies and made them strongly associated with them. They also changed the clan curse to what it be to be and introduced the path of paradox. Beyond there, we saw the evolution of the Indian connection and the changes that occurred there, that we saw that the clan was more focused on India, and the Western branch was just a branch, more or less. So that's it for today. I've introduced you to the Ravnos, an interesting clan that has duality to it, because it has two sections to it. A Western branch, based around gypsy tendencies, connected with the gypsies, ideas of being tricksters and deceivers, criminals. And an Eastern branch, which are avengers, fighting against the Kuei-jin in a basic eternal war, that have a caste system. Now you say, these two sides, say for chemistry, the power of illusion that they both have, what differences, what similarities do they have? But they are connected. The path of paradox, which has been corrupted deep within the Western side, is based upon traditions and idealisms on the Eastern side. So it is an evolution of these ideals that split them away from them, created their own separate bloodline. The Western Ravnos, that many know about, is merely an offshoot, a heretical offshoot of the true Ravnos of India. Interesting that they have this juxtaposition. One side being similar to what the Assamite were, caste-based, military-based, and the other, tricksters and deceivers, criminals. But regardless, if you have any questions, comments, anything to say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. It shows support the channel, the empire, the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can always check out my Patreon, link description below. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.